So good morning to you all, especially those of you that are ringing in from EMEA. We are 9 o'clock British Standard Time, London time, and I know we've got quite a number coming in from the UK, but also across Europe, and also we do have some people scattered globally. So welcome. We are looking today at art class. It's not probably every day that you probably tell your partner or your colleague that you're coming to work to do a 1-hour art class, but that fundamentally is what this is all about in terms of utilizing the risk bow tie technique, bow tie analysis, to get intimate with risk, to paint pictures about risk, to understand risk, which is probably the initial critical phase of great risk management. Is you cannot manage what you don't understand or we don't intimately understand. And this is what today is really all about, is looking at the bow tie technique to assist our understanding in risk. Now, this is part of our ERM series. It is the third one in our series, and at the end I've got the a little bit of an outline of all of the 12 ERM webinars that we're going to be doing throughout 2022 and into 2023. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague who's going to be helping me today, and then I'll do a quick introduction of myself, and then we'll get stuck into the webinar. Michael.
David. So I've been in the risk field for, I think, around 7 or 8 years now. Roles such as risk, compliance, assurance, business continuity. And I first learned about risk bow ties from David, actually, about 5 years ago. So yeah, sort of changed my view of risk, and very excited to be presenting with him today.
Great, thanks Michael. And my name's David. I'm the Chief Research and Content Officer at the Protecht Group. Now, as an organisation, what are we focused on? Well, the word Protecht, our name, gives it away. My passion in life is risk management, and that's really about the protection. And my co-founder's passion in life is technology, and put the two together, and we've really got a passion around the digitization of risk management. Now, that said, we have, I guess, focused our firm, Protecht, on doing the 4 things that we think make up great risk management. And in no particular order, they are automation of risk management. We call it Protecht ERM. And this is really the machine that makes risk management work in any enterprise. The second part, though, is the people, culture, knowledge, hearts, minds, and souls aligned with risk management and engagement. And for us, that is our training arm, Protecht Academy, which is one of the business lines that I look after. The third component then is ensuring that what we do is embedded within the business, particularly in the first line, and to make sure that the process and the training cuts across all employees. And we do that through our implementations, and that is Protecht Advisory. And finally, we have the frameworks piece, which we call Protecht Consulting, and this is what is focused on development of enterprise risk management frameworks, risk appetite statement developments, policies, and risk transformation. And they're the 4 key components. Our whole focus in life is to be able to provide all of those seamlessly. We don't outsource to any third parties, any of that, and that just makes the process flow much easier for us and for our clients. We are based in Sydney in Australia. This is where I'm ringing in from, and Michael is in Adelaide. We also have our London office covering EMEA, and we also have more recently opened up in Santa Monica to cover North America. That's enough about us. In terms of the roadmap for today, I'm going to do a little bit on intro and housekeeping, and then we're going to get stuck into the session. Number 1, why? What is the value and the uses of the risk bow tie technique? Number 2, the building blocks of risk. This is really looking at our kind of palettes of paint, our paint brushes. What are the building blocks that can go into creating the art? Then we're going to look at the actual art class itself, bow tie constructions, methods and skills required to do it. And then we're going to look at the left-hand side of the bow tie, which is all about root cause analysis. Why did an incident happen? And then I'm going to pass over to Michael to do a hands-on building of a bow tie, practical application of it and how we would use that. And then finally, remembering that bow tie analysis is but one of the many tools we have to practice great enterprise risk management. So how do we integrate bow tie analysis into our overarching enterprise risk management framework? We will then go on to a bit on next steps and Q&A, which brings me nicely to housekeeping. Please ask questions as you go. You've got a question box there. Michael and myself will monitor that, and when we get to that session number 8, we will address the questions. Now, in any questions we don't get to in the webinar, we will do a post-webinar blog where we answer those questions in written form. That's if we do not get to all of them in the session. Please also complete the post-webinar feedback form. That's very valuable to us to factor into future webinars. So that'll only take you a minute or so. So I'd beg of you to do that, please. And also you'll be sent a PDF copy of the presentation, so don't bother copying down, and also a link to a recording of this session in case you wish to share it, in case you wish to go back and view anything of it. So that's the housekeeping, which that out the way, we can get then into the body of the presentation, or the beginning part of the art class. And I always think that anything to do with risk management particularly, we need to be asking really 4 questions, which is why, what, how, and who. And this first bit really is the why. The building blocks is the what, the construction is the how, and then as part of the use cases, we'll talk about who ideally is using bow tie analysis across the organization. So let's think about the value of the bow tie. Now, for those of you who have done a bit of bow tie analysis, this will make sense. For those of you that haven't, then just wait with a bit of patience and we'll go through what this is all about. Now, the first element of where we see great value in the use of the bow tie is getting a common view of risk from what I might call confused people around an organization. I know, Michael, you've had some experiences of this.
Yeah, I have seen, I guess, particularly risk registers that have a lot of information in them that's not aligned with what people, I guess, are getting out of their risk registers. So they don't have that common view. They have, inadequate controls being recorded as risks. And I think this common view makes them really light up and understand what it is that we're really talking about, and really gets people aligned on what they need to do next.
I agree, and I think the other thing I find is that if you look at a risk register, I'm exaggerating maybe, but I've seen some like this, 180 risks in a risk register, which is about 165 too many, roughly. And when you actually start analysing the risk register, you're finding, because of an uncommon view of risk, you have impacts called out of risk, you've got causes called out as risks, you've got failed controls called out. And when you actually analyse 180 risks, you realise they're actually the different parts of the same risk. Consolidate them together using bow tie, and you might end up with 15 risks that you are then able to manage. So that is the power of a common view. The second real value is logical analysis of risk. The bow tie is a timeline looking at the connections between the life cycle, or the different parts of the life cycle of risk. So it's a very logical analysis tool, even though it's to a degree quantitative, it's more qualitative. It lets at least you get the connections between the different parts of risk. As we briefly mentioned, the left-hand side of the bow tie is root cause analysis. And this is incredibly powerful to learn from past mistakes and incidents. Unfortunately, a lot of people suffer an incident and then don't spend enough time on root cause analysis to learn from their past mistakes. This turns incidents into learning experiences. The next great value add is it aids in assessing the size of risk. Now, there is a huge debate as to qualitative, semi-quantitative, qualitative approaches to analysing risk. And there's different schools of thought with great passion as to who's right and wrong. I think there's a place for all 3 of those, qualitative, quantitative, and semi-quantitative. And the great thing about the bow tie is if you are at qualitative and assessing the likelihood and the impact of a risk, having a great bow tie diagram, it still is subjective, but it gives you a bit more objectivity, understanding the drivers that could make the risk happen, likelihood, and then if the risk does happen, the connection to the impacts on our objectives. So it's a great tool to support that risk assessment. It also is great in aiding controls assessment, and what I mean by that is plural. When you are assessing how your controls as a group affect the risk to which they relate, you're going to have multiple controls. Now, some of those controls may have been subject to controls assurance, where you've got an assessment of whether the control is effective, partially effective, ineffective. But how do you bring the group of controls together to be able to assess the difference between inherent risk and residual risk? And often it needs a diagram. The bow tie is the consolidator. Not only does it consolidate all the controls relating to that risk, It also shares whereabouts in the life cycle of risk the control addresses. Really powerful. It aids identifying metrics. Now, this is key risk indicators, key control indicators. And the great thing about the bow tie, it shows the storyline of how the risk develops. And as a risk develops, it often gives off symptoms, red flags and puffs of smoke. But it's only when you travel through the timelines, you go, wait a sec, I can pick up a bit of data there, I can pick up a red flag there. So we use it as a basis for identifying a good suite of risk indicators. And my favorite one of all is it's a brilliant storytelling tool. If you're talking risk to people, particularly frontline people, we use our technical language, they gloze over. But if you have and you talk to them in a professional way, but you say once upon a time, and you start telling a risk story, I find that they grab it so much easier and quicker. So utilize the bow tie as a storytelling tool. All of this leads to how do we actually use the bow tie? Well, number one, we use it in risk assessments to analyze the risk and assess the likelihood and impact, or to support that assessment. Helps us in controls assurance, as we mentioned in the previous slide. Great in incident management for root cause analysis. It's fantastic for the left-hand side. Why did that particular issue happen? It's great for identifying metrics. It's also great for mapping and identifying issues and actions. What issue do you have in that bow tie, and what is the ideal action to fix it? We're going to look at that when we do root cause analysis a little bit later in the session. It's also great to help and support compliance management and compliance risk management, and we do that by linking obligations to the bow tie, which I'm also going to show you as well. And last but not least, it helps in reporting because it's a visualization tool, so it's much more, I guess, communicative compared to maybe just writing. Now, to sum that all up, it is great for everything. And Protecht, myself, Michael, are huge fans of bow ties. And I'm at the point of when someone says, what do you do, Dave? And I go, I'm a risk manager. My head says, actually, I'm a bow tie manager. And you know when you love bow ties is when you start seeing them floating around. When you look at a risk situation in life and your head immediately goes into a mental bow tie analysis. And that's why I'd love to get you guys, but I've only got an hour with you, so I'm going to do my best. Now, what I'd like to do is dive straight into our first poll just to get a bit of an understanding of who we've got online. And I would love to understand what techniques are used across your organisation to analyse risk. And obviously, I've only got 5 elements here. You'll get so 5. You may have some others. If so, post them in the chat box. I'll give you another about 15 to 20 seconds, and then I'll share the results with you. Okay, 5 seconds, and then I'm going to close. Okay, I'll share with you now. And we've got 60% no specific method. And I would strongly suggest that should come up. Let's see why that's not coming up on my screen. Hide that. Okay, I think I've gone too far with my clicker. I do apologize, but I'm going to share it with you. 60% no specific method, 40% bow tie, 10% failure mode analysis, 15% fishbone Ishikawa diagrams, and 2% ICAM. Now, some of these are more applicable to particular risks, such as ICAM in work health safety, FMEA in kind of engineering, equipment failure, and so on. Now, what's interesting, 60% no specific method. I hope I help you grab a method, because these methods, regardless of what you use, are fantastic at trying to get more people more engaged with risk so that they understand it. Again, you can't manage what you don't understand. What I do love is for those that are using it, 40% are on bow tie analysis, so I'm amongst friends. So thank you so much. Now, if we now move on to then the art class of building blocks, this is now our palettes of paint. What are we going to use to build the picture? In order to do this, we need to intimately understand what are the building blocks of risk. And I'm going to start right at the beginning, looking at the ISO 31000 definition of risk. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And this gives a bit of a hint where we should be starting in terms of reverse engineering risk. And the end point of all risk has to be objectives. What are our objectives? And this is all about linking risk to objectives and risk management to objectives and strategy. And for this, I'm going to talk about this particular character who's kind of high up a pole, mending some electrical equipment because the electrical power supply has failed. Customers are upset and they are climbing a pole to do the equipment fix. So we would now understand what's the risk. The risk I'm going to select here is falling from heights. Now, in order to understand the building blocks of risk, we must start at the end and ask what are the objectives of the activity. I would put to you they are customer service, maintaining well-being and health, complying with regulations. And on top of that, then, we know that that's the end result of what the person is trying to do. In order to do and achieve those objectives, they have to do things, critical success factors, critical processes. Now, in this particular activity, the critical things are the following 4 things. Get up to the required height, complete the task, get back to ground level safely, and wear required PPE. These are our critical processes required to be performed really well so that we achieve our objectives. Only now, step number 3, can we ask what risk events exist that could stop the critical process being successfully completed, which means we don't achieve our objectives. And as I've already suggested to you, this is falling from height. Now, we at Protecht call that a risk event, and we particularly call it the main event, and it is the most important part of the analysis. And I'll show you later, but it's the knot in the bow tie. It's the center of the bow tie. And I'll talk more about that in a second of how do you know what the center is. The only last thing we've got to do then is go, but why might they fall from height? Root cause analysis. And I've given 5 examples of the root causes. Now, these are the 4 building blocks of inherent risk. Going from beginning to end instead, start off with root causes, dominoes into risk events, impacts critical processes, and then ends up with impacting our objectives. So that is the inherent risk components. To get residual risk, we've got one thing more to add on, and that's our controls. In this example, I have now got 6 controls, and I've now got my 5 components of risk. Now, finally, if you have a compliance angle on your risk management, and a lot of people do, you've also then got to go up to number 1, objectives, number 3, comply with regulations, and understand what are the obligations we have to comply with. And for my story, it is an obligation that the person, in order to do this job within compliance, needs to be wearing a safety harness and a safety hat. Some of you might recognize these as controls. And quite often, our regulatory obligations are actually minimum controls that we have to have in place in order to manage the risk. Now, that gives us then effectively 5 building blocks with compliance obligation added on if you are looking at a compliance lens. Now, I don't know about all of you, but I think a picture paints 1,000 words, so it's time for our first art class. Now, I'm going to pick what I think and we think is the most important part of this whole story, and it is falling from height. Falling from height. And this then should be the short name for this risk in the risk register. Before we go and build that bow tie, I want to highlight then the components that make up the picture. Number 1, we've got our root causes. I'll start off with a single cause. That then starts happening. It dominoes into our events. And those events ultimately impact on our objectives. So we typically have our causes, events, and impacts. Then after that, we then add our controls onto the risk, and we have our 4 main components. Wait a sec, I said 5. Well, we also call out failure of critical processes, which is actually an event, but it is a late event. It's an event that happens just before impact on objectives. And we think due to the linkage between risk events and impacts that going through and recognizing failed processes is important. Now, given that we are event-centric, this becomes the short name in the risk register, and therefore we need to recognize that that is the core. We then recognize that in most instances, multiple causes lead to the event and multiple objectives are impacted by the event, and multiple controls manage that particular risk. Those of you that are not familiar, welcome to the bow tie. And I've just shown you the building blocks of bow tie analysis. That is the essence of what we are trying to do. Now, to finish it off, thinking of a compliance lens, one of our objectives is to comply with regulations, which means one of those impacts on the right-hand side, we'll make it the middle one, is breach of regulation, because a breach of regulation is an impact on the objective of complying with regulation. Therefore, we can link our obligations to this particular impact, and now you've got a complete picture of all the building blocks of risk, including compliance risk. So with that said, now what we're going to do is have a look at the construction of the bow tie. Then we're going to apply it to the falling from heights. We'll do root cause analysis, and I'm going to hand over to Michael.
I just add there that I guess the building blocks was how I really reframed the way I thought about risk, and went back to my organisation and looked at how risks were framed and just really picked apart the risk registers. And there were things like failure of third-party suppliers being listed as a risk, alongside failure to select the right vendor, which essentially is the cause of that risk. And like I said before, there could be hundreds of risks across multiple risk registers. And once we looked at that process, it really consolidated that down to much fewer, as well as identifying that people were calling out things like inadequate controls and calling them a risk, when really they were just part of that bow tie linked to a broader risk. So it was really powerful.
It just reminded me when you were saying that, Michael, is that getting really practical. One of the common things we do with new clients, and I'm going to get really practical, is that they usually send us their existing risk register in an Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to be very visual with you. It's now got risk. We add a few columns to the right. The first column is what is this? And we have a drop-down box that has on it causes, events, impacts, failed processes, and controls. And as Michael said, if we had then said something like failure in the firewall or failure to reconcile, we would go, what is this? A failed control. So we do all of that, and then we extract from there the events, and the events are the only ones that get carried forward into the register as a short name. We then look at all the other ones and go, well, actually, if it is a failed firewall, then what risk does that link to? It links to cyber intrusion. And then we look around the register and go, oh, there's cyber intrusion. And now we've gone and collapsed two risks into one in exactly the way that Michael said. So just getting very practical to you, say what is it in your risk register, and then bring it back to the risk event, and you'll end up with a heck of a lot less risks in your risk register, and it will be much cleaner and a common view. So thanks, Michael. Now moving on to bow tie construction, this is typically how we do a bow tie. Now remember, it's an art form, so there is no singular right answer, but typically you'll identify the main event. Now the main event in the bow tie is usually deemed to be at the point at which in the life cycle of risk you kind of lose control of the situation. Now using really simple technical English language, it's when your day goes from being okay to pear-shaped. Right? Now, in many instances, if you're thinking about something like cyber, it goes from good to bad when you are intruded and they've actually got access into your systems or your data. So cyber intrusion will be at that center point. If it's to do with data management, it will be the point that you lose control over that data. And if you're climbing a ladder, it's the point at which gravity takes effect and you have now started to topple. So the main event is the point at which you effectively lose control of the situation. We then move to the left by asking a very simple question, but powerful. But why? But why? But why? But why? Until the answer is it just is. There is no answer to but why, or it's outside of your influence. This would include things like rain, especially if you live in Australia at the moment. In Sydney, we get a lot of this, causes lots of risks. But why does it rain? Well, we can go into all sorts of reasons in the climate that it's raining, but it's outside of our influence. So we would stop at rain. Equally, if it was a third-party supplier failure and you have no influence over the third party, it would be deemed to be outside of your influence. We go the other way by asking, but what next? Until the answer is an impact on one or more of our objectives. And we've now got the inherent risk bow tie. And then we simply add controls on and link them to the appropriate spot in the bow tie. In very simple ways, that is bow tie construction. So let's do it from our falling from heights. No surprise, in the center, we've got falling from height. It is our main event, the point at which the person loses control or their day goes from okay to pear-shaped. But why did they fall? Because they slipped. But why did they slip? Because of human error. Now, be careful. A lot of people will blame human error as a cause, but it's not true. Human error isn't a cause. We want to know why the human made an error, and it was because they are impaired. Now, for the organisation, the fact they had too much to drink last night is outside of the organisation's influence, so they would have that as their root cause. Number 2, water on the ground. It rained last night. Outside of influence, root cause. Slippery pole, moss growing on a pole. Outside of influence, that's just flora and fauna. Well, flora, I should say, outside of influence. Third party manufacturer defect, assuming we can't influence the third party, root cause. And finally, inadequate process given to us by our superiors, and we had no influence over that process. We have to inherit and use it as is. Now that is known as root cause analysis on the left-hand side, tracing back to the root cause of the risk. We go the other way by asking what next until the answer is an impact on one or more of our objectives. We fall, which means we fail to reach ground level safely, which by the way is a failed critical success factor or a failed process. That leads then to injury, which is one of our objectives, has been impacted. Failure to wear the required personal protective equipment leads directly to a compliance breach, and that is where the compliance risk kicks in. Failure to reach to the required height means we can't fix the equipment, means customer service has suffered, and failure to complete the task means the customer service has suffered. An outline around that, and we have the beautiful inherent bow tie root cause to impact. Now finally, we add on our controls in the appropriate spot: non-slip shoes to slippery pole, inspections and clean off moss and water, harness from falling, PPE check, safety hat and first aid. Now you'll also notice that the harness and the safety hat are an obligation requirement, so that would also satisfy then the compliance obligation. Now all of that for us at Protecht, which I will get Michael to take you through an example soon. This is done on PowerPoint. This is what we do in terms of the process itself. So that's exactly what I've just showed you, but now we're using a digital tool, and that shows us our cause, events, impact, and controls. Now we've got to an overview of bow tie analysis. Some of you may have been using bow tie analysis before, but in fact 39% of you have. And I just want to highlight the different methods that are available for doing bow tie analysis that you may see. Now the first and most traditional method has been called the barrier method, or is called the barrier method, and I particularly put up and pay due respects to Bow Tie XP. And Bow Tie XP has been around a long time as a software solution, and that uses the barrier method. Now what that does, it shows the main event. They call it the top event. It shows the root causes and it shows the impacts on objectives, but it does not show any interim events that connect the causes to the main event and the main event to the consequences. What it does instead, it puts the controls in place, the cause controls on the left side and the impact controls on the right side, and obviously putting them on the lines between the cause and the event is showing it that it's a barrier, hence the barrier method. Now this has been around for quite some time, but at Protecht we tend to favour the comprehensive method. Now if you've never heard of the comprehensive method before, don't worry, we made it up because it never had a name. Because we use it, we literally called it the comprehensive method. Logical, why? It's the same as the barrier method, except now we also show the interim events that connect the cause to the event, main event, and the main event to the impact. Now there's a bit more work to be had there, so use it fit for purpose, but we find it very powerful for all the reasons we said earlier, such as identifying metrics, because if you leave out an interim event and go directly from cause to main event, you have missed out some really good storyline that might have some really great evidence that you can identify. Now that said, we at Protecht will do both the barrier and the comprehensive, depending on what the client wants, fit for purpose. There's an example of the barrier method, where we simply have got cause pathways and impact pathways, and we would add our controls onto those. That is an inherent barrier method, and that is a residual barrier method with the controls on the pathways. Now, in terms of the comprehensive method, there it is. This time we're now including the interim events on the left and interim events on the right, and we now attach the controls not on the pathway, but to the actual node to which they relate. Now, obviously, there's a bit more work in the comprehensive method compared to the barrier method. All I would say is fit for purpose. If you don't need to go the comprehensive, use barrier. If, however, you're doing analysis of an incident or a complex risk, it's really quite useful, we find anyway, to use the comprehensive. Use them fit for purpose. Now, this then brings me to my second poll question, which I will just launch now. It's on the screen, and that is, which bow tie method do you use if you use one? And I know that 59% of you won't be able to answer this, so I'll give you 30 seconds for those that do, as to which method do you use. So 15 seconds. Okay, 5 and close. I think we got most people because we're only looking for about 50% of the vote now. I'm going to close and share with you now. Let's see what we've got. Okay, 50% no specific method, 23% barrier. That's been the more traditional one. 17% comprehensive. That surprised me actually. And where we are as a firm is the last one, combination of both methods. So there's a reasonable scattering over there. And I am very much of the 13% using both methods fit for purpose. So I thought I would leave this section with an actual example, and I'm going to just hide my screen. And this then gives you a snapshot of one based on cyber risk. Now, I'm not going to go through the detail. We are going to be supplying you with the presentation and the recording, so you can go through that in your own time, but that is a classic kind of cyber intrusion risk bow tie. We would expect that to be more at the executive board level, and as you drill down and get more granular bow ties, they will become more detailed. Now that, as you can see, is an inherent risk bow tie because there are no controls, and now I've gone and added on my controls, and that would be a good example of a residual risk bow tie, based on cyber. And again, I wanted to show you that just so you've got something really practical to take away. Now, before I hand over to Michael to go through a practical illustration of this, I just wanted to highlight one of the key benefits of bow tie analysis, and that is root cause analysis. Now, with root cause analysis, we tend to use it for the analysis of incidents that have happened. So incidents that have happened. Now, root cause analysis, we need to be clear on what we mean. So if I now take out or show you the falling from heights one that we had, I have got this as my residual risk bow tie. Now, one interpretation of root cause analysis is what are the 5 root causes on the left-hand side? And there they are in green. Now, that is the root cause of the inherent risk. That's it. But what we're now interested in is why did this event actually happen? Now, a lot of people also call this root cause analysis. What was the reason why the incident happened? But it's a little bit different from what I just spoke about as being the root cause of the bow tie. You'll see what I mean. Now, we take the view that when an incident happens, there are 3 major things you should look for when you're doing your CSI investigation. The first one is look down the left-hand side and look at your root causes of the bow tie and see if any of them relate to inadequate process. If they do, solution is fix the process. This is process re-engineering as a response. The next issue is have a look at your controls that are actually there and assess if any of them are weak. Control weaknesses, inspections missed, hazards not cleaned up, shoe tread worn, and the PPE check was missed. We would therefore remediate the controls. And the final one is control gaps. And this is where you look, particularly the drivers on the left-hand side, and go, have we got any pathways that have no controls attached? Well, yes, we do. We've got 2 of them. The first one is no independent process review for the inadequate process. Well, implement a new control, a review control, to do that. And the second one is no independent equipment check for the defect in manufacturing or in product that we are using. Put equipment check in, and also no impairment check of the worker. Maybe we do drug testing, alcohol testing when we get our people on site. Now, all of that then gives us the reason why that incident might occur, and we can also call that root cause analysis, but it's a bit different because it doesn't just cover the root causes of the inherent risk. It also covers, as you can see there, control inadequacies and control gaps. Now, that is a worked example of root cause analysis, one of the most powerful uses of bow tie analysis when you're dealing with incidents. Now, practical
I think I might have
application. How do we make this work? I'm going to hand over now to Michael in relation to the case study. And Michael, I'm going to hand over to you now, and we're going to have a look at payroll fraud. And I'm just going to pass my screen over to Michael so that he can take control. Michael, you're now in control.
Thank you, David. One thing I might just add on that, the root cause analysis, I think it's also important to realise there's not always one root cause, and that sometimes I prefer the phrase contributing cause analysis, because I've been involved in analysis where people place the cause on third-party supplier who didn't configure something correctly in an IT incident that I helped manage. But once we actually looked at more information that was provided by the IT team who had to actually manage the incident, there was a lot of contributing environmental factors that once you consider those as well, the incident potentially could have been avoided if they'd had a number of other things in place or had been allowed to do things that they had been asking for a period of time. So I think that's also an important consideration. So I've already jumped into our Protecht ERM software, into our bowtie module, so I'm already in there. We're not really doing a system demo today, it's more around just building out a bowtie. So we're going to build one called Payroll Fraud. Must have already built one. Let's just or two. All right. Righto. So we'll default to providing those key building blocks for the risk. So we're going to start with payroll fraud as our main event, and then we can start building backwards, understanding what are the causes or those interim events that might cause that to occur. So for payroll fraud, one of the reasons that could happen is that fake employees are added to the system. Why might that happen? Well, the reason fake employees could be added to the system is because the person who creates the employee can also authorize. So then we may have controls that we want to add on to that particular cause to say segregation of duties. We may say that that's one of the root causes. So when we're talking about fake employees being added to the system, there are ways we might be able to detect that. So we may put in, we'll call something post employee check. Now we can nest controls, so we may consider the ghost employee check to be checking for duplicate details. We may also add another version of that, which is verifying or reconciling the org chart to payroll records. So as you said, we can start adding in extra controls underneath. We can have other pathways to that payroll fraud. So what's another example? Bank details get changed by the payroll officer, get redirected. Why might they do that? Well, they have fraudulent intent. And we can really go back, I guess, as far as you deem necessary and what's within your control. So, well, why do they have fraudulent intent? Well, one reason they might have fraudulent intent is because of their, combination of their personal situation, which we might deem to be a key cause, but also might be that they're disengaged. Workplace. So we may have an example of they've got fraudulent intent, but that is a combination of multiple causes, and we can't really address their personal situation, but we might be able to affect how engaged they are in the workplace, which might be a contributor to this fraudulent intent. We can throw in another one. What else could we come up with? I'm sure if you want to throw in anything at me, David, but terminated employees remaining in the system. So an employee gets terminated, but the payroll officer or whoever's responsible doesn't remove them. Once again, we could say that that's due to fraudulent intent, or all three of these really could be linked to fraudulent intent. I think we'll just get rid of that one. So we can obviously go further backwards and elaborate on more of these, add in more controls. reconciling. I guess think about the whole risk story. There's also an example here where we've got a control that I could apply to multiple causes of risk. So it really shows how they can address different causes. Now moving from payroll fraud forward, so once we've had that payroll fraud, what's the sort of impacts on our objectives that we're going to receive? Well, first of all, there's potential financial loss to the organisation. Could be directly recovery costs. So maybe we can recover it, but there's costs and administrative effort that goes with that. If it's a major systemic issue, perhaps there could be regulatory investigation. And once that regulator investigates, perhaps there could be a fine that gets applied. We might say that is an impact on one of our objectives. Perhaps part of that regulatory investigation becomes a media release. Scroll out a bit there, and perhaps as a result of that media release, then we have reputational damage. That gives us an example of a bow tie, and we can obviously elaborate on that more. There's a number of other ways that payroll fraud could obviously occur, but that gives you a really good, quick example of how that can apply. This workshop, I find that's actually quite powerful at a risk workshop to be able to jot down people's ideas and thoughts as they're talking about them, and they'll be able to really lay it out, and it really gives people that clear picture and that common view of the risk to then really help with those further stages of risk assessment. Back over to you, David.
Fantastic, Michael. That's fantastic. Just do stay there a minute. I just wouldn't mind something I love when I'm doing bow tie analysis. I used to do a lot with sticky labels on a wall, but prior to digitalisation. Yes, I'm that old. And when someone would throw out an idea, I would stick it on the sticky label and go, I don't know where that goes in the bow tie. So there's also an importance of the sticky label, which you've got there. I mean, just write any garbage in there, it doesn't matter what it is. And then once you've got the sticky label, you've captured that thought in the workshop, as Michael quite rightly said. And then you can, at the appropriate time, just bring it up to the right place in the bow tie. And that is a classic, a method to capture the conversation without stopping people because you aren't in the right spot. And that's something I would suggest you practice. What I call a sticky kind of label wall. The other one is quite useful because I want to finish off with art, is this is a residual risk bow tie. And maybe just to finish off, if you say the inherent risk bow tie, then you get both views. And often in workshops, you want to assess the inherent risk and then click assess the residual risk. And I find that powerful as an art. Look, that was a practical art application. That was called Art on Speed, Michael. Thank you so much for doing that. And I will just take control back if that's okay, and we'll just finish off. So I'm just going to grab that back, and that's bringing to our payroll fraud. Okay, now we've got one more polling question, which I'm going to do with you now before we move on to the final piece. That's it. Launch, and I'm just interested, for those that you are using bow ties, whereabouts are you using them? And typically workhouse safety is a very common way, but I'd love to know, and it's also multi-select, whether you do other risk, board level and incidents, how are you using it at the moment would be really, really useful. I'll give you a little bit longer because it's multi-select, but another 30 seconds or so. Okay, 10 seconds. Okay, I'm going to close and share with you now. Let's see what we've got. We have 10% for WHS only. That surprised me, actually. I thought that would be higher, but that's great. 55% across other risks. Now you're making me feel great, because to me, there's not a risk I haven't found yet that I can't bow tie. And because my passion for bow ties, I bow tie everything that moves. Watch out. 31% at board and exec level. Brilliant. I'm a huge fan of using bow ties at board level, because often you'll get bored looking at, say, top 10, 15 risks. And with greatest respect, board members might only meet up once a month or once every 2 months. And you start talking about cyber risk and they kind of roughly know what it means, but they've got no in-depth knowledge. But if you throw up a bow tie that you've previously created, and they quickly look through the storyline, they have a much better understanding of it. So exec level is brilliant. 50% analysing incidents, incredibly powerful for that. And this has surprised me, 62% supporting the risk register. I didn't think it would be that high. I thought incidents would be higher. So there is a lot of great messaging here that bow ties are starting to get their rightful place in risk management globally. So that is exciting me. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, so finally, I now want to talk about integrating bow tie analysis into enterprise risk management. And this is really about making sure that whatever we do in risk management is part of an integrated whole. And so I wanted to put into context the enterprise risk management framework and then where bow tie fits. Now, some of this will be a little bit of repetition of what we've covered, but it will be on the higher conceptual level. And it is this: risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So all of our risk management should be anchored to our objectives. And typically they start with a vision, a mission, and then they will then get more granular to the point we have measurable objectives, and we have our operational objectives, which is to run the organization, and strategic objectives to change the organization, and they're our outcomes. And that is the focus of all risk management. It should be, and everything you do in risk management should be linked to this. The great benefit of the bow tie is the right-hand side of the bow tie, the furthest right, is this: impact on objectives. Now, in order to achieve our objectives, we know what we need. We need to do things. Operational objectives need an operating model, and strategic objectives need strategic projects. As the projects are delivered, they will deliver a permanent change into the operating model. And this layer here then is the things we need to do to achieve our outcomes, which are our critical processes and our critical projects. Now, we also know that these are in the bow tie because they're just slightly to the left of impacts, the failed processes. Now we move to the middle of the bow tie, which is what are the risk events that could impact our operating model and projects. That means we don't achieve our objectives, and no surprises, we have operational and financial risk, strategic and project risk, and that is the layer of our risks. Now, obviously pushing it further in there, we would go back to root cause analysis, and this is the risk layer. One last thing to do: risk manage, operational and financial risk management, strategic and project risk management, and change delivered risk management, and welcome to enterprise risk management. That is ERM. Now, by aside, I often show this to organizations and talk about the importance of building on rock, not on sand. If you build this pyramid on sand, which is a poor, weak risk management framework, you'll never reach for the stars in your outcomes. It will collapse like a pack of cards. If you have a fantastic, strong risk management framework and process, then you'll be able to build the Taj Mahal on top. Great risk management enables the organization to go higher and faster, not to hold it back. I'm diverging, but passionate about this. Now, where does bow tie sit? There it sits. And it's all about how do we get great analysis of that third layer, which are our risks. And that then leads to what we refer to as our risk taxonomies, Now, risk taxonomy typically will have about 10 to 15 risks at board level, level 1 risk taxonomy. And that might be, for example, fraud. We then expand that and make it more granular for the next level down. And that usually is taking the board level bow tie and subdividing it. But then we double the granularity. So it's the same size as the board one, but then double the granularity. We then go down to the practitioner in fraud management, and they want to break it down further: funds, fraud, theft, data fraud, so on and so forth. And then we end up with our hierarchy. Now, enterprise risk management needs a central risk taxonomy to support it, and this then is supported by bow ties for each level of that taxonomy. So it is a supporter of that central library of risks. Now, bringing it all together, we now have, ideally for our key risks, what I'm going to call the skeleton. And the risk bow tie analysis creates a skeleton of your risks so you understand them. Now we've got to add as much data we've got around that risk as possible. So at any point in time, we've got a good risk profile that is up to date and comprehensive. So what do? Well, number one, you'll know that a typical risk framework will have risk assessment in it. So the risk control self-assessment. So we're going to have that, which shows the likelihood and impact of the main event, We're also going to have key risk indicators scattered around throughout that bow tie, our KRIs. We're also going to have controls assurance to say whether our controls are effective, partially effective, or ineffective. We're going to have incident management, which shows historically how many of these risks have actually led to an incident. And we're going to have issues and actions management, where we've identified issues we need to fix. Now, in siloed risk management, each of these will be reported to management differently. But truly integrated enterprise risk management is when you aggregate all of this to the same bow tie, and you do that by linking all of your risk information to your central risk taxonomy, which is the same as linking it to the bow tie. Now, we have played around with showing the results of all this on a bow tie diagram, which I love, but other people get confused. If I showed you a picture, you'd kind of see why. So instead, what we've done is take a tabular view. And what we've done is then aligned all our risk information to the key risk on the left, which is supported by a bow tie, and tabulated it. We call this an integrated dynamic risk profile. We've coined it risk in motion. And here it shows for the risk, the latest risk assessment, results of control testing, compliance, key risk indicators, outstanding actions, internal audit findings, incidents, and whatever other information you have. Now, this becomes the board executive report. If we then drill down and understand, well, why have we got this going on in that particular risk? I'm going to use something you're probably very bored of by now, but COVID-19 as a risk. And if we then go deep dive into that, the first thing we're going to have is a COVID-19 bow tie, the skeleton. And then we drill down into the data we've got, which we call a linked items report. And that shows you all the risk information linked to COVID-19 infection risk, which then gives us that integrated dynamic profile. And all of that is linked effectively to the risk bow tie. Now, that's where I wanted to leave you with true art, red, amber, green charts. Certainly a lot of risk management reporting is done in that way, but that's where I wanted to leave you in relation to the webinar. Now, what I wanted to do now is have a look at any Q&As you might have. I can see from the Q&As you've posted, you've been fairly kind to us. So this is the time to get writing with any question you ever wanted to ask about bow ties. But Michael, I might just pass over to you for a question that you can see that you wish to answer, or throw at me, I don't mind, but we'll move into Q&A for a few minutes and then we'll do a final wind up. Michael.
Sure, so just while we're waiting for a couple of questions to come in, I suppose on that art class, I find sometimes when doing a risk bow tie that sometimes you don't always have the exact center of the bow tie when you start. But I think that's the power of the bow tie, is that once you build it out, you start realizing that you need to move your bow tie a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right, and you haven't got that main event. So I think that's another really powerful part of the bow tie. And again, getting everyone on that same page, and understanding a common view of risk. So David, I think we may have answered the question already for someone, but if causes are out of control, then what preventative controls can be put in place? So the example we gave of rain, what preventative control would there be for rain?
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, I haven't actually got into the depths of the different types of control, but typically we recognize preventative controls, detective controls, and corrective or / reactive controls. Now, some of our clients do also recognize directive controls around directing behaviors and so on. But if we come back to the preventative control, a preventative control is aimed at the left-hand side of the bow tie, exactly as highlighted in this question about focusing on the root cause. And the concept in preventative controls is called nipping it in the bud. And would typically include things like cages around dangerous machines, segregation of duties, which Michael highlighted earlier, risk-specific training, and so on. Now, obviously, the issue sometimes comes down to, well, can we actually control causes if we say that causes are outside of our influence? Well, sometimes you can. So, for example, I'll just make one up. If we had a situation where you had an external stone kicked up by a car coming the other way on the road, and it's outside your car, it gets thrown up by the car coming the other way, which is outside your influence, and it flies across the road and smashes into your radiator. Now that is a root cause because it's outside of your control, that stone. So what preventative control would you put in place? You would put in place a radiator guard, and that would protect you from it. So in many ways, I guess the best way I can explain this is a preventive control potentially is an umbrella for rain. It's an umbrella. because it's protecting you, stopping you getting hit by the rain, and that is then preventing you from getting wet. It's not a detective control, because an umbrella isn't smart, that it acts based on detecting rain. Well, you might have a really super smart umbrella, I don't know, and so on. So it'd be preventing you getting wet. Now, obviously, in that situation, the risk event is you getting damp, because that is when your day goes from okay to pear-shaped. And in your question, Samantha, it would be based on an umbrella, in my view, would be the preventive control. Now, the other question we get commonly asked is around the use of the bow tie in kind of live workshops. And I really wanted to touch upon this before we do wind up. And the issue is this: I am a huge fan of using bow tie analysis in the middle of a workshop as a way of recording people's questions and answers. Now, in the old days, and I'm showing my age, I used to get, about probably 10 to 15 pieces of paper scattered around the boardroom with pens. And as people called out their risks, even though a lot of them weren't risks, I used to think about it, and I used to think, okay, so reputation risk, which by the way isn't a risk, it's an impact, but we won't go there right now. And I would then put that onto a few of the bits of paper on the premise that they're impacts. And then someone else would call out failure of the payments process. So I would throw that up on one of the bow ties based on a failed process. Then someone would say payment error, and I would throw it up onto the same bow tie. And I simply, as the workshop progresses, I build up bow ties as I go. And then obviously magic at the end is when we're done and dusted, I connect them all up, put an outline around them, and rather than 180 different risks as called out, we end up with about 15 because I've connected them all together. Now that is incredibly powerful in a risk workshop. I've obviously moved on from paper and we now use it digitally. So all I would say to you, whatever risk bow tie kind of system software you use, make sure it's agile enough to be used in a live workshop, because it is incredibly powerful. And I'll leave you with this thought: is you then leave the participants with a picture of risk at the end of the workshop, and they feel kind of that they've actually achieved something in the workshop. So it's a great engagement tool. Now, I do see our last question, given the time. What can go wrong with bow ties? That's a great question, Joe. Let me give a couple of examples. Please interject, Michael, after I've said the first one, and if you've got any comments. The number one thing that can go wrong is not so much go wrong, but it is abused. Bow ties can be abused, and they get abused based on the blame game. So if you now start using bow ties to do root cause analysis, so you can wag your finger at someone and go, it was your fault, you're the reason it happened, you are now going to get disengagement, because people are going to fear the bow tie. So all I'm going to say to you with going wrong is do not abuse the bow tie. Treat it in the manner it's supposed to be treated and not blame game, because that achieves absolutely nothing and you will just disengage people from the whole process. Michael, have you got a quick comment on that one? Otherwise, I'll go to the final slide.
No, nothing from me.
Fantastic. Okay, everyone, I'm just going to finish off with the final couple of slides. The first one is, this has our LinkedIn. You just throw your phone over this, and this will connect yourself and Michael to LinkedIn. Sorry, you'll connect to myself and Michael on LinkedIn. So please feel free to do that. We love community. We love hearing your questions. We love hearing from you, because community is the way that we as a risk profession are going to develop, by challenging each other and asking each other questions. Now, penultimate slide is upcoming activities. I did mention that we're doing an ERM series. This is the third one in the series. The 1 and 2 have already been done, and they are available online if any of you wish to watch them, if you haven't seen them already. And then for the rest of them, we are scheduled out to March 23, 1 per month. Next month, we've got risk and control self-assessment, followed by operational resilience, followed by key risk indicators. So if you've enjoyed this, please look out for those webinars. We will also run them in each of the 3 zones, time zones, to make it as comfortable as we possibly can for you. We would love to have you along, and also have a look at our website for other webinars we do outside of the series. But we would love you to take you on the ERM journey with us if you found this of value. Now, other than that, we've pretty much run out of time, so all it has left for me to say is a huge thank you to Michael for joining me. It's always much easier with two rather than one. Gives me time to take a sit and think as well. But more so, a huge thank you to all of you who've taken an hour out of your precious time. Most of you first thing in the morning. I hopefully it set you up for a good day in risk management if that's what you do. And yeah, please enjoy the rest of your day. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut down the webinar very shortly. Up will pop the assessment. And I'd love you to just spend 1 minute to answer those questions. It's great feedback for us. And also look out for an email that will come your way, which will have the PDF of the materials together with a connection of the recording. Other than that, hopefully this isn't the first of our dates that we have with you, and you keep on coming back for more, because we would love to have community with you more about risk management, especially if you think you're getting something out of it. So thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.